The National Assembly is expected to elect the country's next president within the next few minutes. And let's take you live there to our colleagues in Cape Town, Sakina, Kamwendo. And of course, Sakina, it really has been a long day for you lot there in Cape Town, but it seems as if we are reaching the final hurdle.
Yes, indeed, Mbali. We are finally in the home stretch, the back nine, so to speak. And of course, it has been a long day, but I can tell you that we were warned. I'm with our politics editor, Mzwai Mbeche. Julius Malema told you to take the coffee. You were going to need it.
Clearly, I mean, he knew that he was going to challenge for this position. And as we speak now, so they are busy trying to print the ballots so that they can start the voting. So which hasn't started yet. They are preparing the ballots now. So it's going to be a long night.
It certainly is, Mzwai. And we saw there, obviously we had the election of the Speaker. So the Chief Justice presided over that.
Yeah.
Once the Speaker was elected, she then presided over the election of the Deputy Speaker. And now the Chief Justice returns for the election of the President. And the President, of course, then has 5 days to be inaugurated or to take the oath of office. And we know that's going to be on Wednesday.
Oh, yes. And that's what we expect to happen now. And then, of course, if we look at the numbers, looking at the Government of National Unity versus the Progressive Caucus, so we can, predict that President Ramaphosa is likely to obviously win this and then be inaugurated on Wednesday. So the preparations are already underway. And interestingly is that that is the day this current government, Sakina, will cease to exist. Upon the president-elect taking the oath of office, the government that he leads at the time ceases to exist. So which means he becomes the all too powerful executive president. That's why in most cases, a day later, he would then appoint his cabinet. Will he do that this time around, given that there's a lot more to consider because of the unity government that he's assembling? So it will be quite interesting.
And of course, considering that the Constitution is silent on that matter as to how long the president has to appoint his cabinet, I think we've just taken it for granted that it's always happened quite expeditiously. So we expect that it will happen soon because we don't expect a vacuum to occur.
Absolutely. I mean, on the day of the inaugurations, he basically becomes everything, because if you no longer have ministers, so it means every executive decision rests with you. So clearly, there's a lot more going on, and I think you want to get on with the business of governing the country quite broadly. It's important to get people who will be able to then do that work with you. I mean, it's always been, or mostly every time the president gets inaugurated, so the next day he would, in this instance, he would then name his cabinet. But I'm just looking at this dynamic. But I think those discussions, Sakina, are already underway to say from those other parties which are taking part. So do they submit the names or do they get given positions? So a lot more in terms of detail we are still awaiting on the framework of how this government of national unity will work.
Do you not believe it's a done deal at this stage?
I think it's a done deal. In fact, given that as early as this morning, so the deal had not been struck, so clearly certain things could not have been done.
Not been struck or not been signed?
Well, not been signed, because I think the Democratic Alliance was very particular about a particular clause, which we unfortunately were not able to see what exactly. Mm-hmm. But also remember the internal dynamics of the party itself. I don't think it would be smooth sailing, because even them, so they will probably prefer a certain number of people or a certain grouping to occupy particular positions. So this is the time where you may start to see some of the internal dynamics or even divisions or factions within a party like the Democratic Alliance, because once, access to resources has always been the main issue in terms of exposing those interests and perhaps those factions and divisions. I'm not saying it's going to happen here, but this is a political party. It's not going to be different. All other political parties normally follow this route.
And of course, over the years, and I suppose principally because they have been the ruling party, there has been an inordinate focus on the factional battles within the ANC. But we understand that there may be some friction within the Democratic Alliance, at least from speaking to some people this morning, where I pointedly asked a few questions of some members who may be considered to be backbenchers and the likes, and they tell some very interesting stories. Like, for example, someone was talking about waiting to see whether it is people aligned to Steenhuisen who are then given positions or not. And I thought that was interesting.
That was interesting. And another aspect, I mean, I walked out of here during the proceedings, and then I got to meet some of the colleagues in the industry. We were just having a number of discussions, and he tells me a very interesting story, which I found very interesting. He says he met this new MP of the DA, whose first order of business today, guess what, was to vote for the ANC candidate. All along, when the DA was campaigning to take the ANC out of power.
To rescue the country from the ANC.
And what do you do when you're rescuing the country? Your first order of business is to vote an ANC member of parliament to be the speaker. Isn't that the contradiction that this electorate has just put before us?
It's very interesting, but you owe me something, because I called the strategy of the Progressive Caucus.
I concede. I certainly concede, because you saw something that I didn't. And interestingly, you were not even aware that what you called happened. In fact, for the benefit of our viewers, you basically said you think in terms of the strategy, perhaps the EFF may then follow up on the issue around Phala. And guess what happened? Then the Floyd Chimbambo, the deputy president of the EFF, has just submitted a draft proposal to the new speaker about the proceedings around the motion of impeachment of the president.
Yeah.
That was I found that interesting. So is that the strategy they're going to be employing? Is it a foretaste of things to come as this administration begins?
I think for me it was the logical thing to do if you're in opposition, because if you are going to test this formation, this is the first stress test. So what do they do? Because how does the DA then vote on this matter? Remember, during the 6th administration, they were most vociferous around this particular matter, around Phala, how it was handled, and ultimately the ANC closed rank around it and used their majority to basically swat it away. And now that the DA and the ANC are in an alliance, should we call it an alliance? All right. Now that they are both part of the government of national unity,
yes.
Semantics, is it? But
yeah.
All the same, they're in the same camp now. But what does the DA do if that matter is put on the table?
Especially because they have been at pains, both camps, both the ANC and the DA, to say our identity remains. One of the things that the DA has been pursuing quite strongly is the issue around some issues related to the deputy president. So what is going to happen now? What if, for example, the EFF picks up something around, let's say, the deputy president? What will the DA do? So this is a great test for this unity government, and they said we are not losing our identity. We're still going to push that which we believe in. Is it not going to then jeopardize the relations? We don't want to be pessimists, but we are just trying to look into some of the practicalities of how this will work out, especially because we know what these parties have been saying about each other publicly.
Indeed. And of course, you look at how things have played out today, and there are many who are looking on, who are wondering. I've been going through the social media pages as well, and I can only imagine people who voted one way sitting thinking, oh, how is this working? But I guess this is politics, and when we talk about politicking, this is what we mean.
And that's why politicians will tell you there are no permanent friends or enemies in politics. Only permanent interests. What is the interest of these two parties at the moment? They will tell you is the interest of South Africa. That is permanent. That's probably the reason why they're together. Are they enemies anymore? I'm not sure. Are they friends? Maybe. For how long? Your guess is as good as mine.
But if we look at that, the document that Helen Zille this morning was so, forceful about, said that she wants that document, they wanted that document signed as the DA, which was eventually signed. And you look at that framework, the agreement framework, and they talk about sufficient consensus around matters of policy. So, again, what is sufficient consensus? What does this mean for the other parties who make up this government of national unity? Is it sufficient consensus if the DA and the ANC agree? Does it matter what the IFP says or what the PA says? We're looking at the numbers. Yes, we're not going to say the other parties, the IFP and the PA, perhaps don't matter, because they do. Maybe the IFP more so in KZN. In fact, it actually is the biggest beneficiary, and I think it was interesting to see the leader of the IFP seconding the nomination of President Ramaphosa. So that tells you the state of affairs at the moment. So the ANC did actually the same in KZN when it nominated Tamintuli to be the premier, who now has been officially elected as the premier. So looking at all those issues and all those areas, then you start to ask yourself questions. So how will this last? Yes, I guess it's good for the country, especially if it will produce good service delivery. Because, Sakina, we can sit here and talk all night long. An ordinary man and woman in South Africa wants things that are basic. They want to see roads properly paved, electricity, service delivery, water, just the basics. Create conditions of employment. That's all they want. If this government is able to do that, I can tell you now for free, it will get a vote of confidence. But if then they expend all their energies on bickering, that aspect of service delivery is likely to fail, and necessarily the government can't hold. So interestingly, in KZN, because MK had, how much did they have? 45%?
45%, that translated into 37 members in an 80-member parliament.
So they needed 6%, and it was there for the taking. What do you think happened in KZN?
They needed four people. They need 4 people. I think the MK party, I would say, took things too lightly, or took things a bit for granted. I know that they were looking at some of the court-related actions, but I don't think they really took into account the fact that this is politics. And someone who you are taking power away from, and then you act just leisurely, that person will come for you.
So what do you think the strategy is going to be, given that, again, they only need 6%? So, given what's played out here today, the announcement of the Progressive Caucus and those parties that make up the Progressive Caucus, do you think that they might be inclined to welcome, go into some sort of arrangement with MK, or would MK also conversely be interested in joining the Progressive Caucus?
I think the MK appears as a natural ally in that Progressive Caucus. But outside of the EFF, Sakina, I'm afraid many of the other parties, in terms of percentages, bring very, very little outside of the EFF, yes. So whatever weight they try and throw together, so it unfortunately, if you look at the numbers, it doesn't really amount to much. Unless
Elsewhere, but in KZN it does.
Well, even in KZN, because remember, in KZN you have parties that are represented in parliament. It's only MK, EFF, DA, IFP, ANC, and NFP. That's all.
NFP. So
NFP
they have gone with the other.
With the government of
with
national
the government
unity.
of national
so
unity.
As a result, so MK and EFF are alone. So these parties, for example, here, which have decided to be a progressive caucus, are not represented in KZN. So it doesn't really matter much. If you look at other provinces, it's the same thing. But if the MK then were to decide to take active part here in the National Assembly, given its numbers, given what the EFF has decided to do, that voice can start to be heard quite loudly. They said they want to hold this government of the ANC and DA quite accountable. So if they then unite and put that force together, particularly in the National Assembly, and target certain issues, they'll probably make some difference, and then their noise will probably be heard. So
what we've had so far today, of course, we had the swearing in of the members of the National Assembly, and then of course Togo Didiza of the ANC was elected the Speaker of the National Assembly. Dr. Annelie Lotriet, she was elected Deputy Speaker from the Democratic Alliance, and currently what we have underway is of course the election of President. So they've taken the nominations of Cyril Ramaphosa and Julius Malema, and those ballot papers are being printed, and then there will be another process underway. But we saw the demeanor of the EFF. They were laughing. They know how this is going to go. They're going through the motions, really.
Yeah, no, in fact, I mean, Malema was even joking, saying, "You're going to sleep here." So basically, he will frustrate the process until everything is done. So I guess what they want to do, remember, he's been very vocal about this, Julius Malema. He says, yes, we got a setback, but for us, this is a generational mission. So this is still a young party. They are 10 years old, and then it's led by young people. And then I'm sure they are learning from some of these setbacks that they've suffered. And then given that they are taking the step, depending on how the next 5 years, maybe the next 2 years towards local government, and then beyond that until 2029, depending on how they respond to the setback. If their response is such that they are able to hold the government of the day accountable, they are able to expose some of their weaknesses, and then they start to grow, you and I, or even our children, will remember this day in the event their progress continues to grow. Because if, let's say, at some point, EFF's Julius Malema succeed in leading this country, maybe in the next 15 or even 20 years, so the historians will go back to say his first attempt was in 2024, and then at the time it looked like a joke. Look now, 20 years or 30 years later. So you will always have to take these things into context to say this was the start, that's how he led. In fact, look at the president of Zambia, how many times he tried before he became president. I think 5 or 6 times.
As they say in Afrikaans, aanhouer wen. But you know, we're hearing the bells ring again here at the Cape Town International Convention Centre, which is of course a parliamentary precinct, and that means that the members will now go back and vote. So the ballot papers have been printed, so they are now ready to vote. So that's what the bells are signaling. But before we just wrap this particular segment up, just looking at what this means for both the ANC and the DA as the two biggest parties in the country. Surely they cannot afford to fail.
They cannot afford to fail. I can tell you now, the challenges that we are seeing, if, let's say, in the next 6 months we still have the issue of load shedding, we are not only pointing the finger at the ANC, we are pointing the finger at both of them. If the roads continue not to be fixed, riddled with potholes, yes, we'll blame the ANC, but the DA will not be spared either. If unemployment continues to rise, yes, we'll blame the ANC. We'll ask the questions to the DA as well. If KZN does not become a better performing province, we will ask the question to the IFP. We will remind the DA that they helped them, and then we'll go back to the ANC to say, you prop them up. And then this is the opportunity to those parties which are outside. What sort of accountability measures will they put in place to ask those questions? How much will they be a voice of those who are outside? What are the weaknesses they will be able to expose? What is it that they will make South Africa believe they actually are an alternative?
It's going to be interesting. And just finally, with regard to the committees, because that's going to be very interesting, how the leadership in those committees will actually be chosen.
It is quite interesting because that's where you also have to do a lot of accounting to Parliament. What is it that you have been doing? I know one of the things that the EFF really wanted was chairing some of the committees and the DA, and the spread of who is going to get what, for me, will also be very key. And let's hope this government of national unity, which some term, by the way, grand coalition, will perhaps do what South Africans expect of it to get this country to become an even better place.
And not forgetting that there are parties who've located themselves outside of either of these formations, be it the Government of National Unity or the Progressive Caucus. You have parties like Action SA, like the ACDP, others who also have a few seats in Parliament, who've said, you know what, as a matter of principle, we're not getting into any of this. So it's going to be interesting to see how they perform, what they foreground, and of course, how all of this plays out. But for now, here from Parliament at the Cape Town International Convention Centre,